The pristine corridors of Galactic Station Epsilon 7 hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced alien technology. But tonight, something was wrong. Dr. Zelthari, the Vesperan xenobiologist, paced frantically outside the nursery ward, her arms gesticulating in distress while her crystalline scales shifted from their usual calming blue to an agitated amber. "They won't stop," she chittered to her colleague, Dr. Morvac of the Hegemony. "The cubs have been crying for 6 standard hours. Nothing works. Not the sonic soothers, not the pheromone dispensers, not even the maternal resonance fields." Through the reinforced viewing panel, 12 small Vesperan cubs writhed in their biopods, their tiny scales flickering between red and orange in distress. Their keening wails echoed through the station's corridors despite the sound dampeners, a heart-wrenching symphony that had driven most of the station's inhabitants to seek refuge in the furthest sections. The cubs were orphans, rescued from a plague-stricken colony world. Their parents had died protecting them, and now they were the last of their subspecies, precious beyond measure, yet inconsolable in their grief and fear. Marcus Chen pushed his maintenance cart down the corridor, the soft squeak of one stubborn wheel barely audible over the crying. At 42, he had worked as a janitor on various space stations for over a decade, invisible to most of the brilliant scientists and diplomats who populated these gleaming outposts of galactic civilization. His uniform was plain gray, his tools simple, his presence unremarkable. But Marcus had heard crying like this before. He paused outside the nursery, watching Dr. Zelthari's desperate attempts to comfort the cubs. Her species was known for their advanced understanding of biology and psychology, yet she seemed utterly lost. The other medical staff had long since retreated, overwhelmed by their failure and the relentless sound. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly, his voice somehow carrying despite the din. Dr. Zelthari spun around, her 4 eyes wide with surprise. Few humans worked on Epsilon 7, and fewer still dared approach when the station's most critical patients were in distress. "Human janitor," she said, not unkindly but with clear confusion. "This is not a maintenance issue. The cubs are—" "Scared," Marcus finished, "and grieving. They lost their families, right?" The Vesperan scales shifted to a puzzled purple. "Yes, but how could you possibly—" "I raised 3 kids as a single father," Marcus said simply, "before I took this job. Lost my wife in a transport accident when they were small." He set down his cleaning supplies and stepped closer to the viewing panel. "May I?" Dr. Zelthari hesitated. Her people were logical, scientific. The idea that a human maintenance worker might succeed where trained xenobiologists had failed seemed absurd. But the cubs had been crying for hours, and sometimes absurd was all you had left. She activated the entry portal. The moment Marcus stepped into the nursery, the crying grew louder, more intense. The biopods were arranged in precise rows, each one monitoring vital signs and environmental conditions with typical alien efficiency. But there was something missing, something essentially organic and warm that no technology could replicate. Marcus approached the nearest pod and looked down at the small creature inside. The cub was no bigger than a human infant, covered in scales that shifted rapidly through the spectrum of distress colors. Its tiny arms reached upward, grasping at nothing. Without hesitation, Marcus reached into the pod and gently lifted the cub out. "Human!" Dr. Zelthari gasped. "The bioregulatory systems, the sterilization protocols." But Marcus was already cradling the small alien against his chest, one weathered hand supporting its head while the other rubbed gentle circles on its back. The cub's crying faltered, more from surprise than comfort, but Marcus didn't stop. He began to rock slowly, side to side, the way he had done countless times with his own children during their worst nights. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, his voice low and rhythmic. I know. Everything's different and scary, isn't it? Dr. Zelthari watched in amazement as the cub's scales began to shift from red to a softer yellow. The crying diminished to small whimpers. The biopods maintain perfect temperature and humidity, she said wonderingly. They provide optimal nutrition and medical monitoring. How is your primitive contact more effective? Marcus smiled sadly, still rocking. Because they don't provide love. He began to hum, not any particular song, just a low, wordless melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. The sound resonated through the nursery, and gradually other cubs began to quiet, turning toward the unfamiliar but soothing vibration. On Earth, Marcus said softly, we call it skin-to-skin contact. Babies need to feel heartbeats, to sense the rhythm of breathing, to know they're not alone. Technology can keep them alive, but it can't tell them they're loved. One by one, Marcus moved through the nursery, lifting each cub from its pod and holding it until its distress colors faded to the pale green of contentment. Dr. Zelthari helped, learning to mimic his gentle rocking motion, though her crystalline physiology made the gesture somewhat awkward. By the time the station's night cycle reached its deepest phase, all 12 cubs had settled into peaceful sleep. Marcus had arranged them in a cluster on the nursery floor, using soft blankets from the supply closet instead of the sterile biopods. They slept curled together, the way their species naturally would, their scales now glowing with the soft silver of deep rest. Remarkable, Dr. Zelthari whispered, recording everything with her instruments. Their stress hormones have normalized, completely. Heart rate stable. Brain activity shows healthy sleep patterns. Marcus slowly stood, his back aching from hours of bending and lifting. They just needed to know someone cared, he said. That they weren't alone in the universe. Word of the human lullaby protocol spread quickly through the galactic scientific community. Dr. Zelthari's paper on the incident became required reading in xenobiology courses across a dozen star systems. The technique was adopted in nurseries and medical facilities throughout the galaxy, saving countless young lives that technology alone could not preserve. Marcus returned to his maintenance rounds, pushing his squeaky cart through corridors that had returned to their usual quiet efficiency. But now, when the station's various alien inhabitants saw him, they no longer looked through him as if he were invisible. They nodded with respect, understanding that sometimes the most profound solutions came not from advanced science, but from the simple act of one being caring for another. The cubs grew strong and healthy, eventually being relocated to a preserve, world where their species could flourish again. But they carried with them something unprecedented in galactic history. The genetic memory of being comforted by an alien species, of being loved across the vast differences that separated their kinds. And somewhere in the quantum foam of their developing consciousness, they remembered the sound of a human heartbeat and the gentle rhythm of a species that had learned, through its own countless struggles and losses, that love was the one force in the universe that could bridge any gap, heal any wound, and transform any stranger into family. In the end, it wasn't humanity's technology or firepower that earned them respect among the stars. It was their capacity to hold a crying child, any child of any species, and rock them gently until the darkness seemed less frightening and the universe felt a little less vast and empty. The janitor's cart squeaked softly down the corridor, and the galaxy was a little more human for its passing.